Cicero. Cicero. What have you done, Cicero? The air was murky with the smell of iron and sweat within the workshops of the prison of sorrow. The sound of screams echoing from all corners filled Cicero's ears as blood trickled down his nose from his forehead. It was a whisper that called his name which woke him. The former Bishop of Sorrow, agent of despair, and servant of Auctor Dolorem, now hung like tanned leather on hooked chains against the wall of the endless prison. The chains that held Cicero's body by the arms were barbed into his skin. The blood had long since dried as he could feel his power slowly draining in the nothingness. But the voice. It called to him. Who goes? He muttered in the quiet, opening his black eyes and scanning the darkness. The only light that illuminated came from a mysterious source, somewhere beyond the blackness, shining on the pale blue hue of Cicero's skin. He still wore most of his black leather garb, stripped down to a skin-tight bodysuit that was torn at the shoulders and sleeves from where the chains ripped into his skin. He looked into the light as it seemed to approach, twinkling like a beacon of hope in the darkness. "Is that you, old friend?" he whispered in awe. The light dimmed as a golden box emerged from the blackness to greet him. Cicero gasped, as the configuration of sorrow was his greatest tool in augmenting his power with the souls he collected as a deity to the Ancient One. It had returned for him, whispering his name. He outstretched his arm the best he could with the strength of the chains holding him back. He grit his teeth as the chains ripped into his flesh at the simplest attempt of movement. With his open palm, the golden cube landed in his hand. With that, Cicero felt the power of the bishop flow through him once more. He let out a blood-curdling scream as he used that power to pull his body from the wall, tearing the links to the chains where they mounted against the obsidian stone. The cube twisted in his hand as Cicero took in heavy breaths to recover from the pain of the chains embedding in his skin. He watched as they glowed red-hot with mysterious magic, searing their form into his flesh. Cicero let out a scream as he clutched tightly to his cube, the puzzle box clicking and whirring in his hand as the dark magic twisted its form. Cicero opened his eyes once more to see the cube had twisted its form into a diamond, afflicted by an unknown corruption. "My friend," Cicero whispered in the darkness. "Your sacrifice for my freedom will not be in vain." He clenched tightly to the malformed cube, watching as its glow faded. He felt the warmth of his blood as it trickled down his arms and sighed. Cicero had never felt this alive before. He had been betrayed by his master and by those he considered equals. Of course, he would be betrayed. He was better than all of them. The Ancient One feared him. Starga feared him. As they should fear him. He looked at the chains that still dangled off his arms, embedded in his skin like a burning hot weld. He was no stranger to pain. Cicero had long since forgotten his mortal life, but he never forgot the pain he endured to ascend into immortality. He took hold of his last remaining source of power and held it close to his chest, feeling the box fuse with his soul, disappearing from the physical realm once more. He breathed out and placed his hand against his chest before clenching it into a fist. "They think of you as a fool, Cicero. They will pay," Cicero spoke aloud. The darkness walked around him. The Ancient One knew he was free from his chains. It wasn't long now before his hordes would come. Before they would come for him. Those whom Cicero once called his brothers and sisters, despite how much they all despised each other. They would be chomping at the bit to be the one to strip him of his immortality and kill him. To win the favor of the Creator and to ascend. That was why Starga took him. He was only the first. Cicero had no one he could trust. He had to escape the prison of sorrow and reclaim what was once his. He had to prove himself to the Ancient One and seek forgiveness by ascending back to his position of power. It was not going to be easy, but Cicero was prepared for a challenge. He knew he had to improvise, and he knew that with his cube in the state it was in, he had limited use of his former power that must be preserved. From the newly formed hallways came the hissing and howling of the jailers. Toothy, faceless creatures of amalgamated flesh and iron. Abominations created by the warden to contain those condemned to eternal damnation. Simpletons? Simple, insignificant creatures to the likes of Cicero. He knew he had to improvise against these monsters as he looked to the barbed chains that dangled off his arms. He grabbed hold of them and started spinning them rapidly in his hands, building up a momentum of significant force as he glared down the horde filling up the hallway in mass to overwhelm him. He focused himself on the chain whips he made as he waited for them to draw closer. Once the glistening of their sharp teeth became visible, Cicero attacked. He screamed violently as he flung forth his chain whips with such force that they cracked against the monsters' skulls. Audible bone shattering and blood gushing could be heard as Cicero did not falter in his assault against the lowly demonic forces that he once viewed as mindless servants. He still viewed them as mindless servants, only now he also saw them as a nuisance to take his anger out upon. Cicero brought the chains down hard, splitting one beast's skull as the blood from its corpse sprayed into the air. He made his way through the showers of blood he created without much effort. He was the man formerly known as the bishop, and these fools thought he could be weakened so effortlessly. Cicero laughed out loud to himself as he felt the energy of the cube radiate, forcing open a portal at the end of the hallway. The prison of sorrow was like an endless maze. It wasn't a realm built on structure. Its only purpose was to contain. Once a soul was trapped there, it would never get out. Cicero wasn't a typical soul, however, and he knew the architect behind the prison. The warden? The queen of suffering. Hellseeker. The prisons were her machination. She wanted to watch those who suffered. Endlessly suffered. She derived a certain pleasure from this kind of torture. Cicero had every reason to expect her to have betrayed him just as Starga had. As the bishop, he often worked independently of the Ancient Ones chosen, yet they were all his strongest children, and even stronger in unison. They were known as the Hellkites, or the Ascended Ones, or the ones who never die. Down another corridor, Cicero witnessed a line of closed cells that filled both ends of the hallway. He knew he was about to be tested once more as he readied his chains. The prisoners of sorrow were empty husks of their former selves, all of them were shells of their former being, whether it be a human, demon, or a Hellkite. The realm served to consume all until it had nothing of substance left. As Cicero stepped forward into the hallway, the doors suddenly opened. Cicero readied himself as the darkness echoed with the sound of scuffling and heavy groaning. He sharpened his gaze as he focused on the darkness and watched as the shuffling corpses of human husks exited the cells in droves. One would think the prison suffered from overpopulation due to the number of bodies that came out of the rooms, crying and howling through their indecipherable grunts and groans. Their faces were long and gaunt, with sunken-in eyes and skin clinging loosely to their bony frames. Cicero shook his head. "Is this the best you can do?" He laughed. Cicero jested, as he knew the prison was considerably low on defenses, as the realm's draining energies were enough to keep most beings locked away indefinitely. Cicero let out his furious cry as he spun the chains about and effortlessly used them to splice and slice through the husks like they were nothing but a fleshy wall before him into the next room. Blood spewed and body parts flew about as Cicero was merciless in ending the misery of the husks without a second thought. He scoffed as he saw the path was clear after only a few vicious swings. He felt everything was just becoming too easy, and the realm's draining energy was scarcely affecting him as he felt the adrenaline run through his body. He forgot how good it felt to become personal in the slaughter of useless existences. Into another room Cicero leapt, continuing on his quest to free himself from the realm. He still had the power to do so as the cube gave him the unholy strength he needed. It was what fended him from the draining effects of the sorrow. He had to savor that power, and hope that Hellseeker would not intervene before he could tear his way out of the realm. Down another corridor, Cicero encountered more of the jailers, including a massive abomination made of heaping flesh and iron that made the beast Cicero already faced pale in comparison. Cicero's black eyes widened in awe of the monster as it blocked his path. "What sort of twisted construction have you and Khan created?" he asked himself of the warden. Surely the once human Hellkite had not thought up of such twisted beings on her own. This looked like the work of the architect. Only such a twisted mind would concoct something so repulsive. Cicero smirked. He was overjoyed at the prospects of tearing apart one of the architect's creations. It would be his way of proving what he already knew. He was the strongest, and they deserved to fear him. Cicero stepped forward, entering the room blocked off by the greater jailer as he spun the chains around in his palm. He started to like the feeling of wielding such a weapon as these chains. He leapt into action as the lesser demon dared to apprehend him with its massive, brutish arms. Cicero cracked the chains against the beast's fragile skull. It took several hits to actually bring it down, as Cicero wasn't satisfied with simply overwhelming the creature with his immense strength. He took pleasure in the thought of completely decimating one of his former council members' precious works. He managed to wrap the barbed chains around the shoulders on both sides of the beast and flexed his muscles, tearing through the weakened flesh with ease and ripping the limbs right off the creature. It howled in agony as blood sprayed the walls and proceeded to run in circles, stomping and tripping amongst the pool of slick liquid that poured from its undead carcass. The abomination crashed into the wall as Cicero proceeded to whip it repeatedly until the chains were tearing through its body, dismantling the creation into its basic form of flesh and blood. It was anger that fueled Cicero more than anything. Anger at his brethren. At Starga. He screamed in a fury that was unmatched by all who opposed him, sending the remaining jailers fleeing from his wrath. The prison halls were emptied now as he left nothing but the bloody pulp of the twisted amalgamation of body parts that was the greater jailer. Cicero scoffed as he suddenly felt a tenseness in his chest. He groaned in pain and dug his nails into his skin through the thin black attire as it felt like something he had not felt in a long time came back to him. A heartbeat. Not only a heartbeat but a painful one. One that pulsated through his body as what is this? He cried out into the darkness. You grow weak, Cicero. Time is of the essence. Bloody bindings be damned, Cicero scoffed as he struggled to maintain his composure. The whispers of the prison walls started to get into his skull. Cicero's eyes sharply jolted back and forth on the beat to the heavy pulsating rhythm of a heartbeat. The first thing that came to his mind was the memories. The memories of his failure and what brought him to his long-belated fall. The bishop was a cold and calculating figure, but under that surface, Cicero's human curiosities remained intact. Thus he played in a bet with a mortal that exploited his human weaknesses and reminded him of his youth. Cicero scarcely remembered that mortal life, yet still, it haunted him so as he looked at his sweaty bluish-grey hands. The sound of children laughing called out to him as he looked out into the darkness. You're running out of time. Cicero hurried down the nearest exit into another hall. The prison was twisting around him as the realm molded the expectations of his surroundings around his mental state. The walls fell apart and formed a path for him to run along as the world spun on its axis with Cicero at the center. He was becoming more and more disoriented with time as the realm drained him of his energy more and more. The feeling of mortality brought upon hallucinations as Cicero could only see moments of his life stand out. All of them were overtaken by images of Starga and the chains that bound him. He could hear the judge laughing. He could hear all of the council laughing as they watched from the sanctuary of their own realms, joined in unison to communion on his fall through the blood crystal waters that flowed through the veins of the nexus that bound all realms. Distant shrieking could be heard as Cicero listened. It was a familiar shriek. One that brought him pleasure to hear. Was it the girl, who haunted his every waking nightmare? Cicero hurried in the aimless direction, transcending the reality of time and space as he made his way into another chamber. The walls closed in behind him and, as he stood there, trapped now in a prison of space, Cicero looked around. He was in the same room he had always been before. It was like the realm was toying with him. The cube glowed brightly once more only to enlighten Cicero in his goal. What would be his purpose to escape? If the Ancient One truly wished him to cease ruling on his throne, surely they would not have gone through such great lengths to see Cicero fall. Cicero punched the wall as he felt another heavy beating of his heart that caused him to surge with intense, unpleasant pain. Cicero let out a solitary scream that echoed into the void of his loneliness. The cube was weakening. His source of immortality was draining. He had to escape the prison before it consumed him. All that he faced was simply a manner of time wasted. If he could escape the Warden's realm, he could seek his vengeance without further restrictions. As long as he was there he was stuck in her slithering coils. The room was closing in on him. There were no more exits. No more places to hide. He was confined again. He was confined without a manner of escape. He had to make one. He cried out angrily as he proceeded to beat on the wall of the giant room, punching it with his fists as best he could before he stepped back and looked at his chains. They were machinations of sorrow crafted to hold those within the confines of this realm. They had the power to rip through the abominations known as the jailers with ease. Surely they held some kind of new power that one as powerful as the bishop could harness. Cicero started to spin the chains in his hands and focused his thoughts on the walls that represented the closing of the realm around him. He started flailing the whip-like chains against the walls, focusing on what he could into their physical being so as to not exhaust his own capabilities further. The channeling of power was successful, as Cicero could feel chunks of the architect's prison walls being torn asunder with every passing of the whip. His brilliant plan had worked. Of course, it worked. Cicero laughed with joy as he ripped through the walls before the room could tighten any more than he could spin his chains. One strike too many and the foundation of the wall gave weight and the room ripped open like an egg. Cicero burst out of the closing space, and into an open nexus of the abyss. He had escaped the prison confines and entered the fabric of the realm itself. Within the nexus, all things could be molded into the vision of those deserving in the Ancient One's eyes. The nexus was an extension of its will and greater being. It was the fabric that held the dimensions together. Cicero drifted momentarily, as he knew it wasn't over. His escape was far from over. Before him came a vision. A woman. It was Merit Sager. Cicero, her voice hissed. Look at what you have become. She was a morbidly beautiful creature when she appeared before Cicero. Pale and blue in complexion just as he was. Her garments harkened back to an ancient age of man, though she bore them purely for some narcissistic self-satisfaction. The armaments of ancient warriors, gilded black leather, and a horned crown that granted her an imposing stance amongst the weak. Her female features of a once human body accentuated in her garb. Cicero could not help but be impressed by her traitorous sister. He furrowed his brow and sneered. "What I have become is what you and the council have made me," he said. "You have been judged, Cicero," spoke Meritsager. "You are no longer fit to serve Auctor Dolorem, our creator of sorrow." "The Ancient One is not infallible," muttered Cicero. "I have yet a chance to prove myself stronger than what has been assumed of me." "Of course," chuckled Meritsager. "Your cube returned itself to you. A gift from Auctor Dolorem that is being sapped away. Soon you will be nothing but a mere mortal once more. Then what good will you be?" "There are other ways to sustain the cube, Meritsager," said Cicero as his eyes sharpened. "If you were brave enough to appear before me without the veil of illusion, I could show you how." Meritsager laughed to hide behind the fear of Cicero's threat. She was not an ignorant being. A fellow Hellkite would be able to sustain the power of the cube should they be sacrificed at the hand of its bearer. If Cicero aimed to kill her, she would best seek to destroy him, or perhaps there was another way. "I am not your enemy, brother," she hissed through her snake-like lips, flicking her split tongue at Cicero. "I am merely a keeper of souls. The ones who truly wish to see you fall are the rest of the council, for it is them that feel the most threatened." "You do not feel threatened," Cicero sneered. "I feel opportunity, dear Cicero," she chuckled back. "A Hellkite as powerful as you earned their way into the Ancient One's inner circle of the council. I would truly be a fool to stand against you as you are. That is why I am going to let you leave this realm of mine." Cicero raised a distrustful brow. "You would let me go free from your realm?" he said. "What are you up to, Meritsager? Does it matter?" She chuckled as she stepped closer, sidewinding with every step she took until she became dangerously close. Cicero did not flinch, for he knew she was but an illusion. "I know what I want, and what I want involves you getting what you want. I will not have violated my duties for failing to keep you here, for you know you have something to give up should you set yourself free." She smirked as she pressed her talon-like finger against Cicero's chest, causing the cube to glow and react. Cicero scoffed as he glared the Hellkite schemer down. She was right. He knew if he was to escape he would need to exert enough soul energy that it would nearly drain him of all his immortal power and cause that energy to go to waste. He would be left to his own devices to fend for himself until he could have his revenge without any goodwill to speak of. He likely already drew the attention of the architect, and he knew the council would not all agree with Meritsager's decision to let him go. The Snake Queen was a shrewd and deceitful creature, but Cicero knew better than to spit in the face of a generous offer. Such things were a rarity. He had no choice but to accept this opportunity and make an alliance. "If I were to grant you the power, beyond my freedom, what would I gain?" he asked. "That I will serve no part in your apprehension," said Meritsager with a sly smirk as she strutted calmly around Cicero in the empty abyss. "If you wish to grant me a boon, we would share a special connection, my dear Cicero. If you could find a way to communicate with me again, I would be willing to share my insight on the council's motivations. You wouldn't want to run into a fight blindly now, I hope?" "The venom you speak is often coated in sweetness," said Cicero. "But you also know I have no choice." "Oh, Cicero, there is always a choice," she laughed as she rubbed her palm over his strong chest and let her long, snake tongue flicker against his cheek. Cicero was unwavering as he reached up and focused his hand over his heart, causing the cube to glow brightly once more. Meritsager hissed with glee as she slithered back and held out her palms to reveal her cube. The resonating glow created a significant amount of force that caused the abyss of the Nexus to waver. The fabrics of time and space were ripped open in an instant as Cicero witnessed the further twisting and deformation of his cube. Without the Ancient One's blessing, he knew his source of power was crumbling at the drainage of power. He simply had no other choice. He let out a fierce battle cry as he took the whip of his chains and sliced open a hole into the nether void. Meritsager watched as Cicero was then sucked into the hole as her cube consumed the light that emanated from her freed prisoner. She held the small golden object in her hand as she looked into the empty void where Cicero once drifted and smirked. "Thank you for the kind gift, my love," she whispered before dissipating into the darkness.